now, topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed in these radio programs are those of the individual hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of Universal Broadcasting Network. Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, addressing the health, welfare, and safety of all children nationwide, because it shouldn't hurt to be a child. Here are your hosts, Tammy Stefano and Priscilla Perez.
Thank you. Welcome to the National Safe Child Show. We have an awesome show today. We're very excited. I'm Tammy.
I'm Priscilla. And
we
today,
interrupt this really cool UBN radio show to say, don't forget to listen to Hollywood Headliners with me, Rob Weller, Thursday nights at 7 right here.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
it's okay. Well, today, celebrating Halloween, I decided to dress up as a vampire.
Yeah.
And I am sucking the evil out of the world today.
Yes.
And actually every day.
And I wish I would have known, because I would have liked to have been a vampire myself. We've got some people we'd love to
Right. Take the evil.
take all the
Take
bad
all the bad.
venom. Yeah. So we have a great guest coming on in a little while. James Marsh. He is trial attorney and just a fabulous, fabulous fighter for the justice of victims of abuse, sexual abuse, child pornography, all sorts of child abuse. And he's a New Yorker, and I say that as a true New Yorker does.
A very proud New Yorker.
Yes. And we're excited, and we have some links on, folks, on the UBN site, as well as on our Facebook, www.facebook.com/NCS show. So if you have an opportunity now or anytime, please feel free to go on. We post lots of good information about the guests that we have on our show. And when articles come out about them, we like to keep our listeners informed. So I think that we're just about ready to begin the show, and we're excited to have James on the line. James, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hi, James.
We're so
Great to
happy.
be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Our listeners have been anticipating. And so tell us, if you would, tell the listeners, I certainly know, tell the listeners a little bit about your background and a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Sure, Tammy, no problem. I'm a lawyer, as you probably already know, and have really been practicing in this field for over 20 years. I graduated from the University of Michigan Law School in 1990, and while I was at the law school, I actually specialized in the area of child welfare and foster care. So the University of Michigan has a fairly unique program, one of the first in the country, a clinic that's called the Child Advocacy Law Clinic. And it really started in the 1970s when all of this was, child rights and child advocacy was really wasn't even in the vocabulary. And I found that to be very interesting. I hadn't had any real exposure to that in my life, and hadn't really thought much about children in foster care or the best interest of the child or child well-being. But I saw the clinic at Michigan and thought it would be a good opportunity to broaden some of my understanding of certain legal issues and go into certain areas that hadn't thought of before. So I signed up for the clinic, and it was a year-long program where we got to represent children in foster care, and actually got to also represent parents and the government in different proceedings around Michigan. And from there, I did a interdisciplinary project on child abuse and neglect, which was housed in the law school, but it involved multidisciplinary teams in social work, psychology, law, and we would actually do case rounds with each other's cases, discuss different legal issues, social issues, psychological issues, and also we were had some medical students there, so we also talked about some of the medical basis behind abuse and neglect. So I have a very strong grounding in the area of child welfare, child abuse, child neglect. And after I graduated from law school, I went to work at the Juvenile Rights Division in Manhattan, actually representing children in family court every day for about 3 years. So that was a very interesting real-world experience to be dealing with a lot of inner-city problems. It was the height of the crack epidemic, so we had lots of infants who were compromised with crack and other drugs in their system. A lot of kids with HIV, a lot of problems really on the front lines of our child welfare system. From there, I went to Washington, D.C., did a little bit of a stint in public policy by working on Capitol Hill, and after that, I really decided that I wanted to go back to doing sort of the real frontline grassroots work, and the policy stuff didn't interest me as much unless it was really sort of motivated by the grassroots. So I decided to go back and start representing children again in Washington, D.C., in the family court there, and eventually founded an organization called the Children's Law Center to provide direct advocacy for children in the District of Columbia. And that was in 2000, and no, that was actually 1996. I keep forgetting that time goes by, but that's been a while now, and it is now one of the most successful legal services programs for children in the country, and it is the largest nonprofit legal provider in the District of Columbia. So very proud of the work that they continue to do in Washington, D.C., and I'm still involved with that organization there. So that's really most of my background coming up until the things that we're going to talk about today. But
my gosh,
wow, just in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Right.
Short overview. Exactly.
Yeah. We're very, very impressed with the work that you've done, and more than being impressed, because we meet so many professionals that have so much of a history behind them, but your direction is not only impressive but very honorable, and we really want to honor you, James, for the work that you've done, and that you then returned to. Just I'm sure that you were compelled, because the front line is really where the differences are made.
And we commend you on all your work, and now that you've let our listeners know what you've done and what you continue to do. Where, now that Tammy talks about direction, where do you see your direction now via the future as where child advocacy is going?
Sure. Now that's a very good question. Based on my work that I've really done on the front lines and really looked at these problems from all aspects, I got very involved in public policy while I was in D.C. towards the end of my time there. I'm now in New York, and I think it's really important for your listeners and for people to remember that real meaningful change only really happens from the ground up. There's a lot of policymakers out there that are well-meaning, and a lot of think tanks and a lot of organizational institutions that have their own agenda. But the only real way to make change and to be effective in that change is to build it on the grassroots and from the people that know what the problems were. And from the very beginning, when I was at the Children's Law Center, I determined that we were really going to look for problems, look for barriers in the system, systematic barriers to moving children to permanency and to finding good homes and good education and good health care for children. And we were going to sort of attack these barriers systematically through public policy and try to eliminate some of the things that were, just routine problems in the system that really had a huge impact on children's well-being and their development. And so just from your listeners out there, I think where the future is actually the people that are listening to this show and that have the time and opportunity to really think about these issues from where they sit. And so, I think the future of child advocacy is really sort of taking, your experience. I'm no smarter than anyone else out there and don't have any special connections or pedigree. But, really individuals can make a difference if they focus their efforts, and attack these problems in, a systematic way, letting our lawmakers and policymakers know that we're not going to settle for mediocrity, that we demand the best for children that we would for our own children.
Exactly.
Amen to that.
Yes, it's so important that people realize that each and every individual can make a difference. People tend to feel like, what can I do? I can't do anything. They don't realize that numbers are so important, that voices, all of the voices that come forth, regardless of what angle you're coming or what you can do, or whether you are in the front line or in the back line or a side bystander, if you just get involved in some capacity, we have found that it makes a world of difference.
Tammy and I, I always state this, we work diligently every day in this movement. And, Tammy spoke at a particular college, and we did get opposition, and there was a lot of controversy. And we know that. But what are some of the things that you have seen? Because we know, just being in this every day, the patterns, we see, the wrong that is being done to, the systemic failure, basically. What are some of the things that you can educate some of our listeners on what you've seen is occurring within the system, so that they can be a little more educated on what's happening?
Sure. No, that's a very good question, and I'm really going to talk, in real practical terms here about some of the biggest threats facing our children today, and that is in the area that I have been involved in for about the last 8 years, which is the area of child sexual victimization and exploitation, mostly online, and it's an area, and I think this sort of speaks volumes about the challenges we're facing dealing with this scourge of child sex abuse that's happening not only in this country but around the world.
That's right.
I, as you know, had a very solid grounding in child welfare. I had done everything from legal advocacy to policy work to working in Congress to starting an organization to serve children on the front lines. But I had never really completely appreciated the risks to children from sexual predators and sexual exploitation, including what is now known as child trafficking. And when I first became involved in this issue, it was in 2005, so it's almost about 8 years now. And I had been doing a lot of work in the area of international adoption and was very familiar with adoption. I was adopted myself and spent time in foster care as an infant, so I was very sensitive to the needs of adopted children and kids that were in foster care. And I came upon this case in the news involving this little girl from Russia who was adopted and sexually exploited by her adoptive father. And at that time, I had done a lot of work in the area of adoption, and so it was very hard for me to accept and believe that an individual would adopt a child in order to sexually abuse and exploit them. And, my interest in the case, which eventually became known as the case of Masha Allen, was really prompted by my interest in adoption and not anything to do with child pornography or child exploitation. And even with all of my experience, I found it very difficult to understand, really, and accept that this was, in fact, the motivating factor for Masha's, adoption and basically child trafficking from an orphanage in Russia to the United States. So when I became involved with that case back in 2005, I knew nothing about the world of child pornography, child exploitation, or, child trafficking. And, it really took me about a full year to gain an understanding exactly of all of the dynamics involved in the sexual exploitation of children online. And we were very successful at that point in passing a law, which became known as Marsh's Law, to help victims deal with recovering the losses that they had suffered from the unbelievable and incredible abuse that they had undergone. And while that law was very successful, I soon realized that we were at the very beginning and very front lines in dealing with this issue and really educating the public and other people about this issue, which is such a huge and growing issue. And the way that I say that it's growing is because the internet has enabled the broad facilitation of this kind of abuse on a global scale. I want to talk more about that, but even with all of my experience, I guess the sort of takeaway from my experience here is that it was really my lack of imagination of the horrible possibilities that were out there, which really blinded me to the realities of what a lot of children face in this kind of situation. And so I guess to the listeners and to the professionals that are out there sort of, encountering this maybe for the first time, I would say that, there's almost like a parallel universe out there that you are completely unaware of, that is organized and targeting children for sexual exploitation and abuse. And I think everyone needs to become more aware of that and become more sensitive to that issue. And like I said, I know it's something that even with all my training, top 10 law school experience working with hundreds of kids and many different issues, this is an issue that was totally off my radar screen and that I was, sort of unprepared and unwilling to confront.
I'm glad that you touched the subject about the sex trafficking and just the adoptions that are coming in, because I do a lot of work in child advocacy. My siblings, I fought for my siblings in foster care. I myself was in foster care as well. But, you get these adoptions that are coming in, and now, and I don't know if you, Mr. Marsh, I'm sure you're aware of what's happening now, which now, of course, they are adopting them, particularly just to sexually abuse them. But now we have other adoptions that are coming in, which is now called rehoming. And
right.
Correct.
I heard about that.
Correct. And so basically what they're doing is they're adopting these children. Some are sexually abused, but then they're reselling the children. And literally these children can be rehomed or resold on Craigslist. And there isn't a law right now that states that they can't do that. So now they're able to sell these children on Craigslist.
Right. Well, it's like I said, it's I have one of my pet projects among all the other projects that I have going is to educate people in the field of child welfare, like I said, which is where I come from, on some of these issues. And for the first 5 years, nobody would invite me to a conference. I mean, I had spoken all over the country on child welfare and best practices and a variety of issues. And as soon as I became involved with child exploitation, child sex abuse, child trafficking, those invitations stopped, and I don't know if people were afraid to call me or afraid to hear what I had to say, but it was a strange silence in the room as soon as this issue came up. And when I did go to start do training, which I have done several trainings across the country, I found that the workers, the people in the front lines, the lawyers, and even law enforcement professionals were just couldn't believe this. They couldn't believe the things that I had to tell them about the risks and dangers facing children, especially children in foster care. And now we have this. It's interesting the use of the terminology because
Exactly.
in other countries what would be called child trafficking is in our country called adoption, international adoption. I mean
Right.
So a lot of the use, and I'm not saying that all international adoptions are bad, but the language that we use really helps color the way that we approach these issues. And I think rehoming is just another nice term for dumping a child,
Exactly.
or child trafficking. I mean, let's call it really what
trafficking.
it is.
That's right.
That's what
That's
it is.
right.
It's sexual trafficking. And I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of investigating, and you look at the pattern, you look at the map, and I'm sure that you've done it, where in Middle East now being the number one of sex trafficking, and America being number two. So it is prevalent, and we have to, and I really want to motivate my listeners. It's time to stop turning the other way. And I know that as much as it's hard to turn in someone or to say, hey, my brother, my father, my grandfather, and I believe it was retired Judge Hyman who we had on the show, and said the day that people can actually start turning in people, their own family members, that this is what has been done to children, that is the day when things will change, when people can stop turning the other way and actually be vocal. And enough is enough. Too many children have been hurt, and too many children, and this is a global epidemic,
right?
And it has hit every socioeconomic level on this planet.
Absolutely, it is a global epidemic, and it is here's just another perfect example of some of the barriers, and it's almost a lack of imagination, which is our biggest problem, and I know that's probably not a good imagination that we want to have, but a bad imagination that we should have. But for example, when I first got involved with Marsh's case, and then became involved in other cases involving victims of child pornography, I was looking for the top forensic and psychological assessments, medical doctors and professionals in the country to deal with this problem. And I turned to some of the best and brightest professionals that treat victims of sex abuse and treat child victims of sex abuse, and not one of them had ever encountered a victim of child pornography.
Thank you. Thank you, because people need to be aware that when they hear a name that has been esteemed across the nation, they automatically assume, and they need to break that mindset.
Right.
Don't assume, listeners, that these people understand this secret in the world, but especially in our country, that has been so well hidden. I'm sorry to interrupt, because this is really important that people understand. They hear a famous name, a popular name, a doctor that's renowned, and they just assume, of course, whatever this doctor says is gold. And I have seen it over and over again, just even on a local and a California level. In New York, I know I've gotten feedback from certain so-called professionals that are just not experts in this area.
Right, and part of the problem that we're having with a lot of these issues, a lot of these emerging threats and emerging kinds of exploitation, is that even the best people, there's nobody that's familiar or has dealt with this problem. And so, we really sort of need to educate ourselves first so that we can educate the professionals as to the dynamics of the problem. And many of these threats, whether you want to call it, rehoming, child trafficking, child pornography, online exploitation, unfortunately, I guess, given the prevalence of the problem today, but unfortunately, we are at the very beginning of these problems. And, a lot of times, the science, the social science, and the understanding of the impact of these issues and these dynamics, take a lot longer than it is the problem. So we are behind in our treatment, assessment, and dealing with these victims, even the best people, because these victims are still relatively unheard, unseen, and atypical in the types of practices that are dealing with this issue. So this is a huge and growing issue, and I think it's important for us all to sort of educate ourselves on the dynamics here and help push the understanding of this kind of victimology forward so that we are better able to serve victims of these types of horrible human rights abuses.
Absolutely, and that's what they are. They are a violation of the human rights, a violation of a child's, and many times a protective parent, whomever that might be, whether it be the father or the mother. It's a violation of their rights because they really don't get any justice. And you and I touched on that. how do these victims seek justice? And if you could maybe tell our listeners the link that you provided to me that just had me fascinated and quite honestly in tears at the article that you sent over regarding Nicole and Amy and what they endured and are now still going through, quite honestly.
Right. That's a very good question and an issue that's obviously occupying a lot of my time right now, and we're going to talk more about that. But it's true. When I got involved with Masha's case, like I said, it took me really a year to grasp just the mechanics of what was happening to her, about the spread of these images, the way that they're produced, that they're traded, they're collected, and the growing networks of pedophiles and child abusers who are using this material often to groom other children to commit sex acts.
James, let me stop you for a moment. Could you explain to the listeners, just in case they're not aware of the images that we're speaking of?
Yes, let me tell you a little bit about the child pornography. And I saw something on the internet the other day that I posted on my Facebook page that parents were getting arrested for taking pictures of their babies in the bathtub.
Yes,
and
I know. I heard that.
I sort of had to laugh at that because, and I've talked to many reporters, very sophisticated people, that believe that when I'm talking about child pornography, I'm talking about pictures of babies in the bathtub.
Right.
And really that is exactly what I'm not talking
Exactly.
about. One of the misunderstandings about, the substance of what is being depicted in child pornography, we have really, like I said, language is very important here. So we have really tried to change the language around this issue to child sex abuse images.
Right.
And it's really a descriptive term of what it is. It is the brutal rape and sexual abuse of children in all kinds of ways imaginable to whatever sort of human depravity that you can imagine. That is what's being depicted in these photographs.
James, we don't have to hold back here. We really need to move people. Obviously, it's like pulling a mule to get people involved. So please, them being bound. I mean, let's
elaborate.
Right.
This is web radio, so you can say it.
Yes.
And we want our listeners to know.
Absolutely. I'm not I'm not known for holding back. So
good. Good. Neither are we.
We have images of children being bound, gagged, forcibly raped anally, orally, any way that you can imagine. These are young children also. These are children ranging between 6 and 9 years old.
Yes.
That's the typical age of these kids. We have the most disturbing set of images involving a girl being forced to wear a dog collar, being locked in a dog cage with blood written on her stomach, inviting other men to come and sexually abuse her. We have images of another young woman who was producing scripted videos with her father of different sexual positions, graphic anal intercourse, bestiality, children masturbating dogs. I mean, it almost goes beyond the human imagination to describe the kind of sexual depravity that is being depicted in these images. It runs what used to be called hardcore. I mean, it is far beyond what anyone would imagine as hardcore pornography.
Right.
And the other real problem that we are trying to change, and the other issue that we are really trying to sensitize people about is, this has very little in common with what we now think of as pornography. Pornography in today's world denotes, a connotation of freedom, choice, sexual expression. There's a consensual acceptance of this kind of material because the vast majority of it is consensual. The thing that really is different about child pornography is it is non-consensual. It is non-consensual sexual abuse of children, of very young children, that children could never consent to this kind of activity. They can't consent to sexual activity anyway until they're, in their late teens.
That's right.
But it is not pornography in any sort of glitter, glamour, sexy or otherwise.
That's right.
Kind of thing. It is the sexual abuse of children. It is child sex abuse videos and images.
And torture. It's torture.
And torture. Absolutely. It is a form of torture. Many of these images depict what would commonly be seen as torture. So we are really focusing on the language here, and unfortunately a lot of courts have begun to use the term, child sex abuse images and videos, which is really descriptive of what the material depicts.
Right.
None of this depicts any sort of consensual activity at all. Most disturbing about a lot of these images is that the children are depicted as smiling and seeming to enjoy the activity.
Right.
But this is a very intentional ruse on the part of the producers of this material to show children, reacting in a positive way. Because obviously, if children look like they weren't enjoying it, then that material could not be used to entice other children to engage in that similar kind of activity. So.
Right. So they use this. They use those images that they're forcing the child to smile, to look like they're enjoying it, to even speak in the camera, and kind of entice children. They're using this actually to entice other children. James, is that what you're?
Yes, they are, and that's one of the interesting What's interesting about the victimology here is, for many years, the field of child sex abuse was not really focused on child pornography and child sex abuse images. And, very recently I've come to, educate a lot of the professionals in the field on this issue. And, their reaction is, oh my God, I never realized that this was so far beyond, mere, quote unquote, mere child sex abuse, that this is a kind of exploitation which goes far beyond, I'm not at all minimizing the effects of child sex abuse, but this goes so far beyond, the dynamics that we understand with child sex abuse, to real, what we have termed child exploitation, child sexual exploitation, which really removes it from beyond, the context of two individuals to, a sort of a worldwide victimology and a worldwide sort of deviant subculture that has grown up around this material. So, yes, these pictures are purposely used to entice other children to engage in sexual activity, and what's, sort of compounding the pain of the children that are depicted, my clients, is that they know that their images are going to be used to entice other children because they know that they had seen the same kinds of images when they were enticed to do that kind of activity. So it is a self, perpetuating sort of psychological hell to know that the images that were taken of you are going to be shown to another child to engage them in a similar kind of activity, and that it's a never-ending cycle. And that's a very big part of the pain and fear and distrust that the victims suffer from this kind of activity, this kind of material. The other thing that's really...
James, can I stop you for 1 minute? I want you to hold that thought. We have a caller coming in that probably has a question for you, if that's okay.
Okay. Absolutely. I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. Hi, caller. Are you on?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. I've been trying to call in.
All right.
I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get through.
Could you move away from the phone a little bit? It's really loud. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Is it better?
Yes, thank you.
Wow, this is one of the best shows. I think this is probably one of my favorites. You know what? Mr. Marsh, right? John Marsh?
James Marsh.
James Marsh. I have no words to say how grateful I am that you exist. No words whatsoever. You are you are such a fantastic and amazing and beautiful human being, and I want to know what I can do to help. I live in California. I have an organization that I run at my school. It's a college, and I am trying to spread the word of what is going on, and what you're saying is so intense and so real, and I just...
James,
I have
what
no words.
can we do to tell the...
Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, that's so kind. That's so kind. And, you know, I'm sure that a lot of people... Thank you, caller. Did you have a question, caller, or...
Just what can I do? What can I do? I can't... I mean, it's hard just to live knowing that these things are going on, and I want to cry right now.
That's a very good question. You know, I encourage you and all your listeners, you know, to reach out to me. The article that you spoke about of my clients, and a lot of information is on my website at, you know, www.marshlaw.us. I really encourage the listener that called in to, you know, to go to my site, send me a contact, you know, send me an email, and I'd be happy to brainstorm, you know, different ideas that you might have. Sounds like you have an organization already that's up and running. Maybe you need some ideas for things that organization can do to be effective in spreading the message. You know, Massachusetts has a great program now to educate children. There's a lot of small advocacy groups out there that are trying to educate children on some of these issues, and you know, and this also brings up a very good point, because, you know, here we are, the professionals that, you know, the experts that know all about this, and you know, and we're walking into this minefield that we didn't even know existed, and yet we expect our children to be able to distinguish between the good guys and the bad guys.
Yes.
And you know, to protect themselves when we are not even aware of the dangers that are confronting them out there. So there's a huge amount of public education and education of children that needs to go on here. Education of the professionals, education of policymakers, education of children. You know, there's a whole world, and I like to tell people, you know, that there is this, you know, parallel universe out there that we're not even aware of that's going on, and it is like terrorism. It is like Al-Qaeda.
It is terrorism. Let's not say it's like it. It is terrorism. I think that terrorists get treated better than some of these children.
Absolutely. I mean, and these are individuals that are organizing themselves for the systematic rape, torture, and abuse of children. And whatever good or bad you can say about the Internet, this has greatly facilitated the ability of like-minded individuals to get together, to share their fantasies, share their MOs, their modus operandi, techniques. There are even coloring books out there that they have produced that will help entice children to engage in sexual activity with adults. There are coloring books, there are how-to manuals, there are booklets, there are guidelines, there are chat rooms, there are support groups, all organized around facilitating the sexual abuse of children. And this is happening, you know, on a scale that is, you know, unimaginable.
Tell us about this scale.
Yes, you tell us. You elaborate. You are detailed. This is the show to do it, Mr. Marsh. I know that you're assertive in your ways, and I know that you're vocal. So please, just detailed information.
But we have so little, you know, as little information as we have about the perpetrators. We have even less information about the victims. So, like I said, it is a very new and evolving kind of dynamic out there. But just in terms of the perpetrators, what little information there is available out there, there was a very significant study that was published about 5 years ago. It was actually suppressed for a period of time. And
who suppressed it?
Well, you know, it was done through the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it was felt that it was not, you know, peer reviewed and wasn't suitable for publication, and was sort of buried for a little while. But it eventually surfaced and was published in a reputable journal, and has gotten, you know, at least in my small world, quite a bit of attention.
Could you tell us? Could you tell us? Could you tell the listeners?
Absolutely. I'll tell you exactly what went on in this study. So I deal a lot in the area of internet child pornography and victims of child pornography. The vast majority of the individuals that are apprehended for, producing, or not for producing, but for possessing or distributing child pornography, we like to call these the end users. They're the guys who were, by and large, just looking at these images. They'd never touched a child is their typical defense, and they are not, bad guys. They have no prior criminal records. They are by and large, white, middle class, middle-aged men, and who, go to court before judges who are, white, middle-class, middle-aged men, and everyone's sort of left scratching their head as, well, what's really going on here? So what the study attempted to do was to take this category of individuals, the individuals who were apprehended, convicted, 98% of them plead guilty. These are not trials in these kinds of cases. The vast majority of them plead guilty. And to ask these men about their sexual activity with children, whether they had had any history of sexual activity with children, whether they had any sort of hands-on, history of dealing with children. So they took about, 100 men, I think it was about 100 men, into this study, and they looked at their social histories, they looked at all of their prison records and all of their psychological evaluations and all their self-report. And between these 100 men, they had, again, these men were only arrested and incarcerated for child pornography possession. They had never been convicted or caught with a hands-on crime.
Caught, yeah.
Right. Well, this is going to get to this point. Yeah. So they found, 60 instances of hands-on activities with children in this population. And so, it was not one-to-one, but it was a significant number that they had not known before. When they actually sat down and started talking about their sexual history and their sexual abuse of children with these men, they found an average of 100 hands-on contact offenses with children per individual.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
And we know that.
Yeah, we know that.
We know the statistics.
The numbers went from like 50 or 60 to 1,200 instances in this population of quote-unquote non-violent offenders who were merely possessing child pornography and had never been convicted or admitted to any further crimes with children. So this would be this group that people would say, he had a pop-up, he wasn't looking, it was an accident, whatever, baby's in a bathtub, and we find out that actual child pornography possession is really a marker for what could be seen as serious child sexual abuse individuals who had actually engaged in this behavior.
Right.
And so what we're really seeing now is that, child pornography possession really is a significant indicator of a large possibility of actual hands-on child sexual abuse. And we're not talking about one or two children. We're talking about hundreds of children per each individual that is convicted of this crime. So we've got typically about 3,000 individuals that are convicted in the federal system of child pornography possession a year. You take 3,000 and times it by 10. You've got 30,000. 100, you've got 300,000. And the numbers ratchet up from there to just huge numbers.
We have a caller coming in. We have another caller, James.
Sorry,
Sure,
Mr. Marsh.
Caller, hi.
Hello, caller.
Hello.
Caller, are you there? Oops, I think
we lost her.
All right, hopefully they'll call back.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right. But I'm totally engrossed with what you're saying and the numbers that you're giving us. So please,
I know for a fact that they use the pornography. Basically, it's their tool. That's their first stepping stone, because they know eventually they are going to get to a child. My sexual abuser at the age of 8, when I was 8 years old, before he actually committed the acts, showed me pornography. adult pornography before he
typical.
actually sexually abused me. So it's the stepping stone to get to the goal at hand for them, which is to commit a sexual violent act against the child. And
Absolutely,
so,
and I don't know how old you are, but I imagine that your sexual abuse probably occurred before the age of the internet.
Exactly.
So you didn't have
Exactly.
access-
We did not have
you didn't have
internet.
that.
It was a VHS video that he put in, and he showed me pornography and told me that this is the way that uncles love their nieces. And so,
Right, and he did not have access to child pornography through the internet that we do now. And this is where the
it's 100
real,
times worse now.
yes, this is the cancerous effect that this sort of material is having. And one of my experts, a very renowned expert in child sex abuse, said that this is really, the prevalence of this kind of material online. It is really a public health emergency.
It's a public health issue. That's what we have been
public health
pushing.
issue.
Yes.
Because as your uncle, didn't have this material available to him, well, now he would.
Yes.
Now he would have this material available to him. And because of the way that these networks are constructed, they are a hierarchy similar to the mafia or similar to Al-Qaeda,
Yes.
in that individuals gain, prestige and power in the network by producing child pornography. And because it is a largely barter network, they produce the demands on the members are to produce materials that no one else has seen before,
Right.
or certain kinds of material that members with more clout have to provide. So, for example, if you are a powerful member and somebody comes into the network and says, I want blonde-haired, blue-eyed German girls in lederhosen, and somebody says, I have a picture of a girl, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed German girl in lederhosen being sexually abused at the age of 6. I will send you these pictures. If you give me, a brown-haired, brown-eyed girl, being sexually abused with a Halloween mask on.
Right.
And you can see how the material and the behavior and the sexual abuse of children gets perpetrated, because now that individual, in order to get what he wants, is going to produce something that this individual wants, thereby sexually abusing a child. That goes into the network, and then this individual gains additional power in the network as he's able to amass collections of images that other later coming members will want. And so this is really an engine that's driving the actual hands-on sexual abuse of children, just based on the demand for these images within this very insular, deviant subculture of individuals who are collecting, producing, trading, and capitalizing on this material. And so it really becomes, 1 times 10 times 10 times 100, that the demand for this material, these child sexual abuse images and video, are really driving the sexual abuse of children on the front line.
I had done I had a conversation with an ex-intelligence agent, and one of his duties was to investigate the Catholic Church scandal before so much has come out. And they actually went undercover, him and a group, and what he discovered, and the best way that he put it to me, was they are the worst drug addicts, and their drug is a new child, a new face. And that's
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. Was that Ken Lanning or?
No, I'd rather not say. Forgive me.
No,
but Ken Lanning is great, and I have done a lot of research on him. Yeah.
Groundbreaking work that they've done. But
yes.
What has really enabled this sort of exponential abuse of children is the internet, and you can find this material, you can find these groups, you can find like-minded individuals in a complete anonymity.
Yes.
If you think about child pornography as it used to be commercial. It used to be legal in this country in the 1970s.
That's what amazed me.
Yeah, there was no federal regulation of child pornography or child sex abuse images until the early 1980s, and the possession of child pornography was completely legal in this country up until the 1990s. So we are really only dealing, with something that has really been at least a formal political and legal concern for the last 30 or 40 years. That didn't mean it didn't exist before then,
Right.
but it was not, on the radar screen and not regulated prior to that. But if you think about where the law was, where we were in 1990 when child pornography possession was outlawed, this was prior to the Internet. And in order to get child pornography prior to the Internet, you had to establish relationships based on trust with other individuals.
Right.
That other individual could have been a cop. That other individual could be your postman that is delivering this material, from a foreign country. You had to really put yourself out there in a very risky way,
Right.
and in a very, way that you would be easily discovered. And yet, child pornography did come into this country. It was produced in this country, and it was traded, albeit by a very small, closed, insular group of individuals. And you can see while institutions like the Catholic Church was an attractive location for that kind of activity, because it was a small, insular group of individuals that were basically in close quarters. But for individuals that did not have that sort of a network, it took a great deal of trust and risk to obtain and to produce this material.
Right.
Just from the production standpoint, you needed to have skills as a photographer.
Right.
You needed to have a dark room. You needed to have the ability to shoot videos and produce it. And, it took a lot of technical expertise to engage in any of those activities, 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
Which we forget because, we've gotten so far away from that. But today now, we have the means of producing child pornography in your pocket, on your
Yes.
desktop, in your camera bag. Anyone can do it with very little cost. You don't have the risks of trust. You don't have the risks of being discovered. You've got complete anonymity on the Internet. And so from a public health angle, imagine, which is might or might not be true. Again, we're at the very beginning of this, but I've heard numbers that as much as 1 out of 5 men are sexually attracted to children. So that's
I believe
Right.
it. I believe it.
population. So pretend that you have, 1 out of 5 men are sexually attracted to children. Prior to the Internet, there would be a great deal of social control and acting on those impulses, to request child pornography, to try to get your hands on it, to try to get a hold of a child. What would you do with them? What would you say? How would you keep it a secret? Who could help you with this? All of those things exerted a great deal of social control on those individuals, and likely, prevented a lot of sexual abuse of children just because there was no, reasonable way to perpetuate the crime. Nowadays, you have just the opposite. You have anyone with any even remote interest in engaging in this kind of activity, or any, proclivities to be attracted to children or sexually interested in children, in minor children. Now you've got an entire world out there that will not only provide you with the tools that you need to attract a child in order to have sex with them, to groom a child, but you have a support group online to walk you through every single step of the way, and basically to share in your successes by trading whatever images you can produce of that encounter. So we are entering into a very dangerous situation where people who may have, there was a social control, there was a repression, there was a behavioral control on whatever impulses they may have. Now we have the opposite. We have a validation of those impulses.
Right.
We have an encouragement of those desires, and we have the means to affect whatever sort of impulses that you might have.
They have an open door.
An open door. That is why it is
Exactly.
such a public health risk to have this material in such broad circulation and the means to produce it. And we're not even talking about, the effect on the victims, which is just, huge and lifelong and never ending. So
Exactly.
it is a very dangerous time now with such unfettered access to this kind of materials and to children, and it is a very, very dangerous time.
You know, Tammy, I really hope that the opposition and the controversy that was at the college, I hope that they're listening to today's show, because Mr. Marsh, you have opened a lot of our listeners' eyes, which is what we always, we're advocates. We do this every day. But there are people, and this was just a small class where there was opposition and controversy, and you look at that number, and I told Tammy, I said, Tammy, that was just one class, and opposition that we got, and the controversy. I can imagine a nation. Just imagine a nation.
I'm tired of it.
I'm tired of it, and it's time to take the blindfold off. Yeah. We're assertive, we're aggressive, and Mr. Marsh, I hope that we can.
We're coming to New York.
We want to come have coffee with you, and we want to have a collaborative.
I'm not having coffee. I'm pulling you over here to California for a little while because we've got some work to do here, James.
We do,
and
we do.
We need to clone you, because your mindset and your vigor for what is right is what is needed, and people are so fearful. Professionals are so fearful to say the right thing and be politically correct. You know what? The bottom line,
it's like, oh well, it's my reputation at my job. It's like,
there's nothing correct about this.
I'm tired of all
the bullshit.
I really, really am. I don't care if you're an attorney, if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher. There's 4.5 million teachers in the union. And you're going to tell me that you don't know between right and wrong? It's time that we do the right thing to protect children.
Absolutely.
And it is a public health hazard.
Forward. What kind of money are we talking?
People do know the right thing. I mean, and the problem is that there's a systematic suppression by the perpetrators of these kinds of crimes to invalidate any sort of fears, concerns, or to expose them. And so what we have is sort of a public dialectic which tends to deny this, to marginalize it, to put it within the realm of hysterical, crazy, radical feminists. I don't know, however you want to put it culturally, that are stirring up this stuff. But that is the typical dialectic of the individuals who are engaging in the kind of abuse. Because as we've seen in the Catholic Church, as we've seen in other institutions like Sandusky, these people are walking among us in plain daylight, and we refuse to acknowledge it or do anything about it. And it's them who gain power from that kind of discourse. While the victims are marginalized and told that they're crazy or that they're hysterical or it really wasn't that bad.
I'm so tired of it.
The Pope at one point said, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't offering an explanation or making excuses, but he said, the belief was that children would forget this, that it would not, they wouldn't remember the abuse. And that was a justification that was used for engaging in this kind of material.
No, we don't forget. We don't forget.
And so there's a lot of denial that's going on in society, and it's a very hard issue to confront, a very hard issue to deal with. I'm certainly not saying that this should be, dinner time discussion, every day, but because of the great risk that it poses to children and the great public health risk that it poses to even, future potential perpetrators, to be drawn into this, to be engaged in this material at a young age, to being groomed to be a perpetrator by other perpetrators, it is a real and present risk. And, we don't have to deny the prevalence of child sex abuse in our society. The numbers speak for themselves. And so, like any other problem, whether it's breast cancer, prostate cancer, or drunk driving, or any other of the social issues that we've dealt with, this is one issue that we're going to have to deal with. And it's going to involve, some uncomfortable discussions with our children. And it's going to involve some uncomfortable discussions with the perpetrators in our very own families.
That's right. That's right. But the bottom line is, when we look, they have, I don't know if you've heard of the ACE study. Are you familiar, James, with the ACE study? ACE connection?
No, talk to me about it. I may have heard of it.
Adverse childhood experiences. It's online. ACE. ACE is too high would be the site, and it's so important for everybody to know that, because what the ACE study is addressing is the lifespan of the victim. How does it affect a victim? It affects the entire life. It affects their relationships, their ability to keep jobs. It affects their health in so many ways. You know, victims are 4 times more they go to the doctors 4 times more often than a normal adult who has not ever been victimized. So,
absolutely. Now, those public health, the longitudinal and long-term health implications, the physical health implications, let alone, the mental health implications, are huge. And I don't care, what your politics are or how you approach this problem.
Exactly.
If anything else, and this is what we're trying to get out in terms of our efforts to sue the perpetrators. But if nothing else, the taxpayers end up paying for this problem.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's you and me that are paying for the perpetrator's crimes. So if you just really can't accept anything else that we're saying today, you could definitely say, well, I sure as hell shouldn't be paying for this with my tax dollars. But the reality is that we're all paying for this crime through, not only the medical costs, the psychological costs, but the lost income and tax payments by individuals who can't work, lost productivity. It's like smoking or anything else. It is debilitating, and it limits your life options and your long-term total health. So, if you just want to look at it in those terms, it's undeniable that it is costing the economy billions and trillions of dollars. And that is a large part of our effort to seek compensation from the individuals who are perpetrating these crimes.
There is a doctor out of the University of Michigan, ironically. His name is Dr. Daniel Saunders. Have you heard of him before, or the study that he did?
Saunders.
Yeah, I have heard of Dr. Saunders.
Okay.
Yes.
So Dr. Saunders did a study that is published on the Department of Justice, the DOJ site. And what he calculated is it's costing between $500 and $750 billion of tax-paying money every year as a result of not recognizing the abuse that children are going through.
We wonder why we are a
and
broke
that's a
nation.
low number.
We wonder
I know.
why we're a broke nation. It's like, look at the numbers, and $500 to $750 billion dollars.
Yeah. I was at a congressional briefing last year in Washington, and the CDC came, and they were showing this chart that I thought was pretty cool. And what it was showing is, one, it showed a bunch of houses representative of a community, and every 4th house was shaded out, representative of a victim. Every 4th house. And so you began to see, listen, this is in your community. Just walk down the street, count 4 houses, because one out of 4 females is being sexually abused. And quite honestly, James,
I think it's 1 in 3.
Yeah, I think it's 1 in 2.5 is what I'm looking at, because
1 in 3,
but
definitely.
This is only my theory, of course. However, when we look at how they come up with these numbers and these statistics, they're based on Child Protective Services and substantiated cases of abuse that then get given on to the Department of Justice, and it goes down this whole train. But the bottom line is, even within a household, if there are more than one child being sexually abused, that household is only counted as one. I don't know if your listeners knew that.
It's so funny that you said that. Well, there was one time that, I'm one of 6 siblings, and my older brother, at the time was married, and, they know all the work that I do. And we literally sat there and we were talking about child advocacy and abuse and neglect, and we're counting all of us in the house, and literally all of us were abused. All of us were abused, and there were literally 8 people in the house that day. And so you really think about that number, and I'm just like, okay, this is just one house, one family, and you look at 8 people that have been abused.
That's right.
So that means that if that's just my family and the people that are connected to me, I can't even imagine how many families are affected out there.
What kind of numbers are we talking about as far as monetary? What profit margin? I've heard some different things. Nothing that is solidified. Just just different discussions out there. But do you have anything that you could even theorize on to say this is how much money is being circulated as a result of these images being put out there?
Well, that's a good question, and it's something that we have struggled with. And before we move on to that, and I will now talk a little bit about our efforts on behalf of victims of child pornography. I have a very interesting when you start talking about numbers. I have a very interesting post on my blog, which is www.childlaw.us. It's from December of 2011, so it's a couple of years ago. But it's a very interesting post that deals with numbers from the Centers for Disease Control, for CDC. So these are not, numbers that are pulled out of a hat or numbers that are, hard to imagine. These are hard and fast numbers by the CDC. Produced some very interesting statistics about the number of women and children who have been raped in their lifetime. And that number is 1 in 5 women have been raped in their lifetime, which is a huge and shocking number. But what's even more shocking than that is when you drill down into the numbers and you start crunching the numbers, you find that over 400,000 U.S. girls under age 10 are forcibly raped.
Oh, my God. I'm so dimmed time.
Under age 10. Those are numbers from the CDC that, as you can imagine, have gone through a fairly rigorous vetting process. And by rape, I mean completed forced penetration, attempted forced penetration, or alcohol and drug-facilitated completed penetration.
Oh, my God.
Those are the numbers that we're looking at.
And these are the reported cases. Now imagine the unreported cases.
Absolutely. And I crunched the numbers even further. And again, these are not, scientific numbers. I did take statistics in college, so this is not a statistically accurate number. But when you look at the number of elementary schools in the United States and you put that number on top of it, that means 6 girls in every elementary school in the United States has been forcibly raped.
Oh, that pisses me off.
You know what?
Girls in every elementary school. In my town, where we have 4 elementary schools, that's 24 girls who are on my soccer teams, in my daughter's dance class, on and on and on. 24 girls in our town have been forcibly raped under the age of 10 in elementary school. So, when you, like you talked about the every 4th house, when you start looking at the numbers and putting it in that perspective, it becomes a very sobering number.
Absolutely. And it makes me petrified for, I would never have a babysitter. I can tell you that. Would never happen. Not knowing. Once you know, it's like the Matrix. Once you take the pill, there's no turning back.
Right.
Absolutely.
For me in my life, there is no turning back.
No, this is a fight until the end.
Do you feel this?
My staff also experience this because, they're all very excited to do all this cutting-edge legal work, and then they start working for me, and, they have cousins coming up to them saying that they were sexually abused.
Yes.
They have relatives coming up to them saying that they were in child pornography. They're on the internet saying, oh, my God, I knew this guy in high school that was just arrested for child pornography. So, you come and work for me.
Yes.
And, we have great perks and we're doing great work, but it is, like, falling into the Matrix because, this whole, disgusting world opens up to you that was always there.
Always.
It was always there in plain sight, but we were just not attuned to seeing it for what it is.
Mr. Marsh, I actually have a question. Here in California, our judicial system, and we talk about this all the time, about the training that our judges and our attorneys actually have. They have 12 hours of training regarding, child abuse case issues in family court or dependency court. And then they have 8 hours every year to, I guess, make sure that they know what they're doing. The Children's Law Center, can you elaborate a little bit more the training that goes into your, the Children's Law Center, just so that we know how they're being trained and how we can replicate that training, so that way the judges can.
What can we do?
And what can we do to start really training people to understand child abuse, see the child, see signs of child abuse?
Is there a webinar?
Exactly.
Maybe, we would love to work with you.
Yes, Mr.
And
Marsh.
not right now, of course, on the air, but we would love to create some type of, even a webinar. Educate people. Maybe they're embarrassed. People are so embarrassed to even talk about sex, as if it's not everywhere nowadays. But they become even more embarrassed to speak to their children. They don't even know how to. And you know what? It's not the time anymore, folks, to be embarrassed.
No.
It's
time to educate our children.
Children are being exploited.
And sometimes they know more about sex than you do. So it's time to really open communication.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to put you in touch with some other individuals that are doing this kind of work, that are doing this, public education piece, which is so critically, and it's a growing movement. There's a lot of awareness now on campuses about campus rape, and that movement is really growing quite quickly. It's spreading more to the high schools. But unfortunately, we're going to have to start in elementary school.
Yes,
and, a lot of
that's
times,
what we're working on.
A lot of times the people that are teaching it are the ones that are perpetrating it.
Yes.
So,
exactly.
There's no safe place here unless, it's really taken up by the professionals and leaders in the community, the educational community, and also people like yourself who can spread the word on what some of the best practices are out there for spreading this kind of information. It's going to have to become as ubiquitous as, don't drink and drive.
Yes.
All the kinds of things that we sort of accept now, which, 20 years ago were sort of laughable. What do you mean, don't drink and drive?
Yeah.
It wasn't part of the culture.
Gay rights.
This is a real sort of cultural thing that we're going to have to undergo so that we can make sure that children are safe from these kinds of predators, which are always going to be out there. There are not enough prisons to hold the number of people that are engaging in this activity. There aren't enough. Australia, where they used to send, everyone from England. You would need entire continents to hold the individuals that are engaging in this kind of activity, or that have a proclivity to engage in this activity. So, in light of a situation where law enforcement is not going to ever even begin to dent the problem, we need to make sure that children and people on the front lines and people that are responsible for looking out for children have all the tools and resources that they need to make sure that those children are safe.
Right.
We want federal and state accountability. We want to really have children have their rights. Right now they're considered a chattel. They're considered movable property. And so at this point, it's, everything that you're saying, I commend you on your work and all the efforts of, advocates here. Tammy and I, we work every day to ensure that we can educate others. And by bringing people on the show, that are educated, such as yourself. And I just commend you on all your work. And I hope that, we do want to bring you. We want Mr. Marsh here in California. We want to collaboratively, be able to work together, because this is going to take unity. It's going to take a lot of voices. And, we are working on certain projects here. And I'm hoping, Mr. Marsh, that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we are.
No, we do mean to put you on the spot, actually, my dear, because you're a commodity to us and to all children and to justice.
And we are
for victims.
We are working, Tammy and I are working on a project, a humongous project to shed light on this issue. And I would really like your pledge that you will work with us.
He's already pledged.
That you will work with us, Mr. Marsh. No, but I need to hear it. That you
Absolutely. I will work with you. I'm happy to, I'll be on your show. Well, can't come on every day, but I will be on your show.
Oh no,
this project
is much bigger than you can imagine. And it is shedding light on the issue, and we will take this internationally and globally because we have had so much support from everywhere to do so.
Yes.
But now that I know that I have your pledge, then I'm just so happy.
Excellent,
I'm so happy.
Excellent. So
I'm very excited to hear this because this is really, where we need to go. And
exactly.
One of our big efforts right now is taking this issue to the Supreme Court, which is going to hear this issue in January.
Okay.
We have been for the last 5 years, we have been seeking restitution for victims of child pornography.
I want to talk about this. This is important. Many people
Very
don't know
important.
it. Please.
This is like two things that you've never heard of. So it's a little complicated, but we, in my work representing children who are exploited and victims of child pornography and victims of child exploitation, we realize that there is in the federal courts a remedy that's available to them to hold the criminals responsible for their behavior, responsible not only to society through whatever criminal sentence that they have to complete, but also financially responsible for the losses that they have caused to victims, to actual victims,
exactly.
Who prior to my becoming involved with this issue were silent and were not represented in the court system and were not even heard of or considered. And so through our efforts, we have been representing victims of child pornography that were profiled in the New York Times Magazine article that you referenced, Tammy, and that is available on our website at marshlaw.us. So you can go there and you can click through the New York Times and actually read the
Fabulous article, 15 pages, I think it was. I read it and just had to read it a second time. It's so intense.
Emily Bazelon did a fabulous job writing that story. It took a year to write. It was a whole entire year of getting that story out.
I believe
she did an amazing job. And even seasoned professionals in the field could not finish the story because it was so moving and so heart-rendering to see what these young women have gone through just in their day-to-day lives of trying to rebuild their lives from this kind of victimization.
And it doesn't end. It doesn't end because there potentially are images still out there.
They're re-victimized over and over again.
This is a never-ending fight for them.
It is a never-ending fight, and it's interesting you use the term re-victimization. We've actually changed that, and I call it ongoing victimization.
I like that.
Yes. That's a new one.
It is their ongoing victimization.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. That's
better.
Perfect.
We've actually, it's funny that you use that term because in our brief that we're getting ready to file before the Supreme Court, that was a question of what we should call it. And re-victimization sounds great, and it does capture some of what is involved in this kind of criminal activity. But, sort of when I sat back and think at it, I said, well, it's not only re-victimization, it's victimization. It's ongoing victimization.
The victimization actually never did end. It never did end, so you can't be re-victimized. You have to have stopped, and it never did, actually. So ongoing is much better.
Especially via the Internet. Via the Internet, they're all over the place.
It never stopped.
It never stops.
So go ahead.
Well, and much of the sexual activity and sexual abuse that my clients experienced was to produce child pornography. And so that is another thing that a lot of people have a hard time sort of wrapping their heads around. And I know, a lot of judges also have a difficult time imagining that. But just like any sort of commercial production, a movie that you go into a theater or whatever, these are productions. These are created for the audience. And, much of the child pornography that's out there, the misunderstanding is that these are like tokens or souvenirs or whatever you might want to call them. But in reality, they are not. They are the reason that the children were sexually abused was to produce the material for the end users. And that's really what our focus has been in terms of seeking restitution for these victims in the federal courts. The children's rights movement is broadly paralleled by the crime victims' rights movement. So these are very similar kinds of movements that most people are unaware of. But the crime victims movement has really been gaining steam in the last 20 years, and it culminated in something called the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which was passed about 10 years ago. in federal law, is a federal right that applies to individuals in the federal criminal justice system. Like many other things, the states are probably, at least a decade behind where the federal government is on this issue. But more and more states are adopting crime victims' rights. And so when our clients contacted us, they were at the very beginning of receiving notices under the Crime Victims' Rights Act of cases in which they were identified victims. That is, that their images were identified as part of the collection of images that the child pornography defendants had possessed.
Right.
And so when we were confronted with, a young woman, 16, 17 years old, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unopened notices about cases in which her images were discovered, we soon realized that Marsh's law that we had passed, 5 years earlier would not be adequate to deal with the kinds of numbers and the volume of cases that we were confronting. On average, my client gets notice of about one notice every single day of every year of a new case in which her images were discovered.
And in order to get that notice, you have to have a perpetrator had to have been caught.
Absolutely, and that's only in the federal system. So in the state system, it's probably 3 times as large. So you could probably imagine 3 notices a day, 3 new cases every single day of individuals being caught with this material in their collection, and these are only the individuals that are being caught. So
that's right, exactly, which is few. We know that.
Very few. So you can add a multiplier to that, and you're talking thousands a day, or tens of thousands a day. So the numbers are very, very large. And so when we were initially confronted with this issue, we said, how are we going to get some sort of compensation for our clients? Many of them who are on welfare, who are on public assistance, who are unable to work, who can't go to school, who can't keep a job, who can't confront members of the public, who are afraid to leave their house, So these are the real practical costs of this crime on individuals. And these are, young women who are just starting out in life. These are women who have every right to a bright and, intelligent future ahead of them, and yet, they are on public assistance. They are not able to make sense of their lives. And so what we, quickly discovered is something called restitution, which is available as part of the criminal sentencing in these cases. And so we began an effort to request restitution for victims of child pornography possession under a law that, like so many other good things, was passed as part of the Violence Against Women's Act by then Senator Joe Biden back in 1994.
Thank God, because that was the best thing that could have happened, because finally the victims have something besides abuse to look at and remember and embarrassment and being ashamed. And
it's like, now you pay for what you've
done. So tell us about how this payment comes in.
And I think people underestimate, just on that point, I think people underestimate the real psychological and practical empowerment of victims of just having that kind of ability to go before a federal judge. And the story talks about it. It talks about my client Amy. And, just hearing the judge, a very powerful judge sitting up in his robes, on a elevated, platform, saying that she is worth something.
Yes. And he said, didn't he say that actually what they were offering was too little?
Exactly. Yeah, that moved her more than any amount of money could.
Yes.
And so what we decided to do was to start seeking restitution from these individuals, which is imposed at sentencing. And the federal law that was passed by then Senator Biden requires the perpetrators to pay the victim the full amount of their losses. And so, when you first look at this law, and you view it in context, and you view it, with the fact that so few perpetrators are ever caught.
Yes.
And you look at it in the context that, the costs to the victims are huge. Their losses for psychological therapy, their lost income, their lifetime, out-of-pocket expenses. We're not even talking pain and suffering.
Right.
We're just talking their out-of-pocket expenses.
No punitive.
My client, no punitive. No,
Right.
this is not the the spilled coffee or anything like
Right.
that. These are her out-of-pocket expenses for my client over her lifetime, were approximately $3 million. And so we decided to ask the judges in these cases to impose exactly what the statute said, which is the full amount of restitution, the full amount of her losses to be placed on each and every defendant until my client had received her full restitution of $3 million.
So when
Now,
you say
in
each and every person, that's each and every person that is caught with the image of that particular individual.
Yes, must pay the full amount until she's fully compensated.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's a very simple concept, and it's
Yes.
very clear in the statute, and it's very fair to the victims, and it's actually very fair to the defendants because they are allowed to share in the burdens of whatever amount that they expend for the client, for the victim.
Right.
And the practical effect, everyone says, well, Mr. Marsh, you're going to get billions of dollars. No, we're not going to get billions of dollars. We're going to get the $3 million, and everyone is going to owe us $3 million until we get the $3 million. And
That's
then we're
right.
not going to be done.
Yeah.
And that is what's fair to the victim. Now, we all know from a very practical perspective that none of these defendants has $3 million.
Yes.
Right.
And the other thing that is often lost on the public when they hear, these lawyers are making millions and people are going to be working in penal colonies and chain gangs and everything else, is the reality of how restitution is imposed is much like child support. So any individual that is saddled with a $3 million restitution order, they're going to be paying, like my prisoners do now, $25 every 3 months.
Right.
Right. And so the vision that people automatically leap to is Mr. Marsh is getting rich, the victims are getting rich, we're cashing in, these poor guys, they're paying $100,000 a year, they're working. The reality is vastly different.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
What's wrong with the perception here is what is actually far removed from the reality, which is that right now my client has to go to every corner of the country to file these requests, to track down the defendants, to seek a few $1,000s in each and every case if we're lucky. And we believe that really is in opposite of what the statute says. What the statute says is the victims should get as much money as possible, as soon as possible, so they can rebuild their lives.
Right.
And then let the defendants go and sue each other to even out losses.
That's
It
right.
should be a burden on the defendants, not on the victims.
Exactly.
I'm so
We
tired
need to
of
start
them.
having the
Why do they do that?
victim go through more abuse, because that's what it is, while the defendant sits back, and it's almost like the burden
is on the victim. The burden of proof and
Well,
the
well, the
burden of
burden
all
of-
the work is on the victim.
the burden of proof is on the victim per se, whoever is
Right.
accusing. I get that. However,
But why does
after she has proven that burden, I just don't get why the courts are not more empathetic.
Well, right, and you make an amazing point there, because nobody's challenged our numbers.
Right.
Right. Now, the cases, nobody said that we're not entitled to it, because lawyers are sneakier than that, and judges are perhaps a little more savvy, and they're saying, well, Mr. Marsh, you're entitled to it,
Yeah.
but, and that's the big but,
Yes.
and that's the issue we're going before the Supreme Court is on. You're only entitled to the amount of damages or losses that this defendant caused. Or you need to prove that your client suffered, additionally, quote unquote, additionally, because this individual over here did something in his basement that nobody knew about, which is downloaded her picture. So, we lawyers have a wonderful, and politicians and judges have a wonderful way of, giving you with one hand and taking back with the other.
Absolutely.
And that's the sort of scenario that we're in now. We're saying, oh, of course, Mr. Marsh, she's entitled to $3 million, but you know, this defendant probably is only going to have to pay 25 of that, you know.
Right.
So that is really the issue that we're taking before the Supreme Court. And, you know,
what
the
date
real
is
issue,
this?
I know. We want to keep up on this.
I'm sorry. The real issue, we've got about 1 minute left. I want to get...
The real issue is liability in the internet age. You know, liability to victims when you press a button and the theoretical possibilities are endless. You know, you're not being put in the newspaper. You're not having your name on the bathroom wall.
Yeah.
You're not having something slipped to somebody in a note in class. You're having this broadcast to the entire world. And how should the legal system respond in a world where children can be victimized on a global scale? Are we going to resort to these old notions that are 100 years old, you know, about, you know, the cow kicks over the lamp that starts a fire kind of thing? Or are we going to really be looking at this from a victim's perspective and to try to compensate the victims for the global impact that this crime is having on them? So, so what's happening in our case? That's as easily as I can sort of summarize the issue.
When
our
is this?
briefs are due in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And the cases then will be fully submitted to the court and scheduled for argument in the early part of January, the 13th, 14th, or 15th of January. We'll be having an oral argument before the Supreme Court. We have at least 10 amicus worldwide organizations are submitting briefs in this case in support of the victims. This is going to be a watershed moment for victims. This issue is going to be looked at like it never has been before by the Supreme Court. And like I said, we have organizations from all over the world that are filing friend of the court's brief in support of the victims.
Thank goodness.
What can we do to support you in this?
Right.
And what can our listeners do? Anything that we can do to help you?
I think the most important thing now is you can go to our website, childlaw.us.
Okay.
We've got all the documents up there. We've got all the information up there. All of the briefs and outlines are up there for people to look at, become educated about the issue, and just prepare to speak to this issue, you know, around the dinner table, in your towns, communities, publicity about this, so that let other victims know. There's a very, very small number of victims who have actually come forward in these cases.
We need for them.
Right.
We want to make it easier and automatic for every victim here on go into federal court to get the full amount of their losses, to be collected by the government and sent them a check so they can begin to rebuild their lives from this horrible crime.
That's right.
Even with all of the work that I've done, there are just a handful of victims out there that have actually even come forward. And we know that there are hundreds and thousands of children in the same situation.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
My client and we are hoping that this case can provide a means for other kids to come forward, to step out of the shadows and start demanding their rights in this and other cases.
We are so grateful to have you today. I feel like I could go another hour and a half.
I could talk to you forever.
Yeah. We need to have you back on the show. We thank you. Everybody, once again, your website is
www.marshlaw, M-A-R-S-H law.us. That's all the information about our firm, the cases that we handle, and the kinds of clients we represent. And there's a link there to our blog, which has all this information that we've talked about today, which is childlaw.us.
And your Facebook is?
Oh, my Facebook is Marsh Law Firm, I believe, is our Facebook page. If you go to but there's links to everything.
Okay.
So just get to our website, and everything else will fall in place from
James,
there.
we're so grateful to you and for you, for your work.
I commend you.
We will have you on again soon. We want to know what's going on.
Exactly.
We're sending everybody over to the site and to support and
we're going to be following the case, Amy's case. We're going to be following all the cases
and Nicole's,
and Nicole's. And I dedicate a show every Wednesday, and this one's dedicated to Masha and to all the victims out there that are coming forward. But I do dedicate this show to Masha, and I thank you very much, Mr. James Marsh, and I thank you for your pledge.
Yes.
Thank you both for this great opportunity and for making this kind of information available. It's only the work that you're doing that's really going to start to change things, because we need a lot of voices in unison.
Yes, we do.
To begin to tackle these problems and make a significant change in society. So you guys are doing a great job.
And you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Thank you.
You're
so
always
much.
welcome. You are always welcome.
Yes.
Thank you, and have an amazing day.
Thank you. Take
Great.
care,
You
James.
too.
Okay.
Thank you.
We want to.
Thank you for listening to the National Safe Child Show on UBN Radio. For past episodes, visit the archives on ubnradio.com. And for more information, go to nationalsafechildcoalition.com.